Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day to day lives.
Today, we're joined by USA Today bestselling author Laurie Dove. Laurie is a reporter and editor with work featured in numerous publications, earning several honors for journalism. She holds a master's degree in creative writing and literature from Harvard and is an adjunct professor based in Kansas. Mask of the Deer Woman, her debut novel, is out now. Laurie, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it is such a joy to be here. I'm so excited to visit with you all today.
Oh, us too. Thank you so much. I before we started recording, I was kind of gushing about what a fan I am of you and the book, and it's just there's so much to unpack. But what I wanted to start with, and I just jumped in. Sorry, Greg. I'm an eager beaver, but I was really fascinated by some of the personal info you shared in the afterword of your book, a little bit about your personal
Yes.
story. And, without leading the witness, I thought it had a lot to do with kind of belonging and maybe even a little bit of imposter syndrome in that context. Could you tell us about your background and how you kind of came to write about this particular topic and what the topic is?
Yes. So when I wrote this book, I didn't know what kind of book it was going to be. I just sort of wrote my way through it and I put into it all of these things that interested me at that moment. So it feels like this wonderful culmination of some things I've carried with me my whole life and some things that I was interested in researching at that time. So it's almost like a time capsule in a way. I think I'll be able to look back on it that way. But as I finished the book and other people began to read the book, someone said, "Oh, this is really a story about grief." And I thought, "Oh, it is in a way that I hadn't initially intended it to be." And the same is true for issues of identity and belonging, which really wasn't my intention when I wrote the book. But I find that when I'm writing, these things bubble up into my work. And so there it is. And I try not to shy away from things that are tender or that are difficult to work through, because I think that's the beauty of, for me as a reader, being able to read someone else's story. And although this is fiction, there are all of these life experiences and big questions that I brought to it.
Mm.
So I was adopted as an infant, and my birth family is Indigenous, and I was adopted by Mennonite farmers. And so I was raised in a very culturally different environment than that. And it was a closed adoption. So I didn't have contact with my birth family, but what we did have with my adopted family was the information that they shared about their indigeneity. And that was celebrated in my family, and being adopted was celebrated in my family. So it was really a wonderful experience. I think about Voltaire and how, the best world of all possible worlds. That's a little bit what it feels like looking back. I had these great experiences and this beautiful recognition of where I came from. And so those um, big questions really kind of came up in this story for me as I was writing about this tribal marshal, Carrie Starr, whose experience is different than mine, but similar in some ways to a lot of people's, where she has two or more different worlds that she can walk between. And I have dear friends who are members of different cultures, and they're often contradictory from each other in some ways, where they feel as though they're maybe too much in one part of their lives and not enough in another. And so to explore those kinds of questions, I feel like was very universal in this book.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, you mentioned that sort of the straddling different worlds, and that echoes not only in, it sounds like, in your kind of personal life and upbringing, but also within the book itself. You have the deer woman, who is this mythological character that walks between worlds, and then also your main character Star is having to sort of navigate that as well, of depending on where she is and what scenario she's in, she's either considered too white, too native, and has to kind of bridge that gap as well. So it sounds like you had a very kind of rich tapestry in terms of when you were beginning to get into the headspace of the character and kind of navigate the story as that went along as well.
I was, and some of it is from my either personal experience or from questions that I ask along the way. I kind of like to look at things from all kinds of different angles. That's just who I am. But then also really important experiences that other people shared with me that were in that same vein. So really, it's kind of a collective sharing through Star.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a lot with this book. I mean, I feel like the kind of scope of everything, and you've touched on a little bit, but it's a really taut mystery. There's a lot of layers of identity and grief, and really rich characters that you've drawn, particularly your female characters. And I'm just wondering what layer or what kernel was kind of the original piece. Was there something that born the rest of it, or did you kind of go in knowing you wanted to do this kind of multi-layered piece?
It started with the ending of the book. This book was first a short story. It was very different in scope, but I wrote the ending of this short story first, and it is almost identical to the ending in this book. And it is, I saw so clearly Carrie Starr, and she was with a younger woman who wasn't her daughter, but who was of a daughter age to her. And that interplay is what I was interested in. What would I do for a younger woman to protect them or to offer some sacrifice of myself that when I was that younger woman, I might not have considered for someone else? And so that interplay of how female relationships can be so sacrificial and interesting and layered and complex was really what drew me into this story, was the character first.
Yeah. Yeah. I read in an interview where you mentioned being fascinated by strong female characters who defy societal norms.
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly have quite a lot of that in this book, starting with Star, who feels, incredibly, like, almost painfully human, and is butting up against all of these kinds of things going in. Was that, it sounded like you started character first. So was a lot of that really the discovery process of starting to write the story to figure out what those specific norms would be that she would have to kind of combat along the way?
One of my techniques as a journalist for a long time was to write the story as I was discovering information,
Mm-hmm.
so that the reader felt like they were coming along with me. And that allowed me to make even the most pedestrian topics more interesting, and offer a way into those. And that's really the process that I took with this book, where I discovered who Carrie Starr is as I wrote the book. I asked big questions. I asked a lot of what if questions. And I spent a lot of time with the book just in my head. I spent more time thinking about the book and making decisions, trying different things out mentally before I got to the page. I write very quickly. And so that part is never an issue. I wrote the middle of the book in 4 days, like 60,000 words in 4 days. So, but it's the decision making that really slows me down, because as a journalist, those decisions are often made for you. You're deciding how you're going to tell the story and what's most important to the story, but it exists.
Yeah.
As a fiction writer, I had to kind of trick myself into being able to make those decisions. So I would think through them, and then I would almost give myself an assignment when I sat down and wrote the book, because I thought, okay, you know what it looks like, you know what's happening here, let's see where it goes. And that's really how I got to know this character.
And do you find that sort of not being penned in by necessarily, facts and information presented to you. Is there a point where that becomes liberating to be able to kind of just, intuit the story as it moves?
I have to remind myself that I don't have to be so direct in my research,
Mhm.
because I feel I'm always like keeping a list of sources and things like that, and when I am doing something directly, it is very accurate, but I do have to remind myself, look, I have this freedom to really change this for, this finding might not actually be in this county, in this state, in this part of the country, but I can make that happen reasonably within the world of this book. So that's something that I remind myself. I thought that I would experience this great freedom and it would sort of take me off the clock like I was when I was a journalist. And it has not been like that. I've actually had to make more decisions as I've been writing, but I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I don't want to change anything about that, but it wasn't quite what I expected it to be.
Okay.
Mm. Well, I'm curious about your path to novel writing because you do have this background as a journalist and you've went and got a master's at Harvard at one point, which I want to hear more about. But this kind of, we've had multiple guests that were previously journalists who kind of evolved into novelists, and everyone's path is different. So I'd love to hear about when you decided you wanted to make up stuff.
Yes, I love that. Well, this was always the dream. I remember very clearly as a child, I was an early reader and an early writer. And I remember very clearly deciding I am going to write books because I can put all of these things that I'm interested in or that I love or that I'm questioning into this form. And it was already a form that I loved and spent a lot of time with. And when I got my bachelor's degree, I already knew that was the direction I was going to go. But then I ran smack up against how do you make a living and also support yourself and your family. So I became a journalist. And the truth is, I really loved that because I was able to ask people questions that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to ask them,
Mm.
and I was able to tell their stories in a way that felt like I was doing important work.
Mhm.
And that was my favorite thing about it.
Mm.
And that was a joy that really carried me through this career that I've had. When it came to writing the novel, though, I had started and stopped and started and stopped along the way all this time because it always got pushed to the bottom of my list. I have 5 daughters, so we just had a lot going on at any given time, right? In the best way. And so when I'd get to that, oh, maybe I'll write this evening, maybe I'll get up early. And I have tried every writer's routine you can think of. Like, I'm a little obsessed with other people's routines and like trying on different parts of it. But I would only get to a certain point in these novels and it would sort of just fade away.
Mm.
When I was 50, I graduated from Harvard with a degree in creative writing and literature and felt like I walked into my life.
Mhm.
And I left that program with the draft of this book
Mm.
and that was published. And I knew I wanted to write books the rest of my life. It took me a couple of years to really turn that corner, but I'm doing exactly what I've always dreamed of doing.
Mm.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Did you, what was was there a specific thing that really compelled you to sign up for the program in the first place, to sort of like take that sort of step to, put yourself kind of, I guess, on the road to where you are?
That's a great question. I liked that I didn't have to relocate for the program. That was a big consideration for me because I'm in Kansas and I have family here, and I when I started I was also the mayor of my town here, and so I really needed to be in this location. But what I ended up really loving about it was the program itself and the instructors and the other students that I was with. And not only did it help launch this novel career that I have, but it also gave me these lifelong friends who are also writers and big readers. And we like to talk about all of these things. And the absolute thrill of being able to read, go to classes and talk about what you've read, write, go to classes and talk about what you've written, read other people's work who are just so brilliant. Everything about it is a joy. I wish I could do it over again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say you were the mayor of your town?
I
I mean, you just dropped two bombs in the last couple of answers, Laurie, that you're the mother of 5 daughters, and I'm going to come back to that. My mouth is still like, but this ties back to your novel so well, and I'm sure that's no coincidence that you have a very wonderful and complicated character in the mayor of the town. That I don't want to spoil anything, so it felt to me like you had some experience there with local politics and kind of the goings on. So I'm wondering how much of your experience is imbued in that, and then also how you in real life pursued local politics and became the mayor. So that's a lot of questions in one.
These are great questions. I love it. Well, let me first say that my town is nothing like Dexter Springs, right? My town runs smoothly. Everyone works together. There are no factions in my town. And I will also say, we have a brilliant city administrator who is not reflected in this book at
Okay.
all in that character. But what it did allow me to do was work in these sort of complicated, charming ways that smaller towns work together. We have about 7,500 people here, and it is really something I think unique to a small town where you may have people that are on different sides of an issue or a project, but we're all still going to see each other at the grocery store and the gas station
Mhm.
and the kids' games. And so I love that proximity that we all have. And I was able to work some of that into this book and hopefully into future books as well. Now, as for how I became mayor, it is such a fun story. So I first ran for city council. I was on city council for 2 years and then I was elected mayor. But I ran for city council because I got an anonymous letter. I got an anonymous letter encouraging me to run for city leadership. And I thought, well, as one does with anonymous letters, absolutely. That is exactly what I'll do. So here we have it. 6 years later,
Wow.
I was finishing my term as mayor.
Did you ever solve the mystery of who wrote the anonymous letter?
That was
Never,
never.
never. And no one has confessed.
No.
So
All right.
hopefully someday, maybe they'll hear this and
Exactly.
tell me.
It also
Yeah.
sounds like a great plot point for a future book or a writing prompt.
Oh,
I mean,
Right.
maybe it was your
yeah.
future self writing to your past self, if you want to go in that direction. I mean,
Okay, I am so on board with that because I say all the time, I find that when I write, I'm just leaving clues for my future self to go
yes.
back and put together. So I think you're onto something.
I like that. Yeah.
Or
Well,
maybe
this
it was,
will.
sorry, go ahead.
No. Please, please.
I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you're the mother of 5 daughters, which is in and of itself incredible. It answers my question about how you were able to so beautifully and completely capture a mother's love for her daughter in this book, um, and really writing about the depths of grief and kind of um, the tumult of being a mother. That was all done so naturally. But from a practical standpoint, and someone who's the mother to one human, it's such a different part of your brain that gets used and exhausted, but it really draws, I think, from your creative self. And I think it would be really helpful, and it's self-serving, to hear about what it's like to be a mother and then also draw from that creative spring, like how you did that, and then how being a mother has informed your work.
It really changed everything. I was not a child or a teenager or young adult who grew up interested really in children or babies or, even really envisioning a big family for myself. And then my first daughter was born, and I was like, what is this? I felt like I'd truly loved someone for maybe the first time. And my daughters they're all so different from each other, and they're just engaging and intelligent and full of courage. And they've given me this whole lifetime of feelings and thoughts and situations to mine creatively. And they've given me permission to do that. Not that this story in Mask of the Deer Woman really closely reflects any of their journeys, but the feelings, right? Those feelings are universal.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was writing this, it was really cathartic because my daughters were growing older, going into the big wide world, and although they're so capable, I'm still full of this fear of, what if.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than putting that on them, I put it into this book, which
Mhm.
was probably a healthier thing for
Yes.
them,
Yes.
and was able to kind of write through some things that way. But they've given me such a range of these beautiful and heartbreaking experiences, and I'm really thankful for them.
Yeah.
Mm.
That you use the word, it stuck out earlier on in one of your earlier answers. You used the word tender, kind of writing about
Mm.
tender places. And one of the things that really compelled or felt compelling to me about this book is you really do write about a lot of tender, very very personal, very kind of like just those kinds of visceral things with a real ferocity. So
Mm.
in the writing itself, in the actual prose writing, there's such this beautiful tension in terms of that, and that I have to imagine comes out of that sort of that maternal love and that compassion you're talking about. The other thing that you were talking about just a little earlier is this sense of community, right? And this idea that you were the mayor of this town and that you have these opposing things, you have to sort of navigate different personalities, different agendas. And one of the other things I think you do beautifully in this book as well is I don't want to ruin anything or put anything out there, but there's part of the heart of the plot of this book revolves around this big project that's going on in the res, and people having different motivations and being on different sides of this issue. But even the people that I didn't agree with philosophically, you were able to, in your writing, put across why that was compelling to them and
Mm-hmm.
what that thing was. So everyone, even the people who are kind of on the wrong side of the issue, so to speak, come across as three-dimensional and empathetic in their own ways. And I just have to imagine that, cumulatively, all of these things had to have led you to be able to have that kind of approach to these characters in the story.
Yes, and it's really important to me that characters are like that, not just like a few select characters, but as many as I can create, because people are like that.
Yeah.
People are complex. And I like being able to explore that as I write. And I'm so happy to hear that that's how you felt reading the book, because that was really my goal.
Yeah.
Mm. I was curious because so much of the book um, is framed around kind of the natural world and the res and a particular insect that's really critical to the plot. That was fascinating to read about. And now I know that you're a journalist. I can see, that there must have been a lot of rabbit holes and research that went into that. But I'm wondering specifically, just kind of your natural world descriptions were very vivid. Did you spend a lot of time kind of being out in nature and specifically in similar areas to kind of capture that? What's your process like for writing about, nature?
Yes, so I've spent a lot of time growing up in Kansas and Oklahoma, where this book is set, and a lot of time outside. I grew up on a farm, and I preferred being outside to anything else. That's always where you could find me. And when you grow up on a farm, and there, we there was no cable, didn't exist. I didn't have a cell phone. We had one landline that I was never in the house to even hear. So outside, I had a lot of this time to observe and to reflect and to think. And sometimes I would, in the summer, I'd be driving a tractor in a field for, many hours. And I think a lot of this stemmed from that time, just all of that thinking. But when I wrote this, the atmospheric environmental part of it, I really did for memory and imagination rather than a very specific place. But then once I wrote it, I did an extended research trip with one of my daughters to that area. And I was so pleased that I felt like I got it right, because I wanted to make sure. I didn't want to be influenced by what I saw now when I went to begin with as I was writing, but I did want to fact check myself by going to that area after it was written and seeing, okay, does this feel accurate for this time of year? And I went at the same time of year that the book is set as well. So that was very helpful. It was reassuring. We're talking a little bit about imposter syndrome, and that was really a move to reassure myself that what I'd done here was something good.
To that, sorry, I'm plugging myself in. My apologies. You spoke just a few moments ago about kind of as a kid, you were very observational and meditative in terms of being able to take in your environment. And I wonder now, it sounds like you're actually a very quick writer once you get to the writing itself, or can be. But is that sort of observational and meditative headspace still a part of your writing process in any capacity?
I think so. What I do is watch it play out in my head and then transcribe it like I would as a journalist.
Okay.
I almost have to like trick myself into getting, out of my head with making all of these decisions. So when I watch it play out, I'm just able to transcribe what I'm seeing. And then I work on it in layers. Once the manuscript's done, I'll go back and I think this could be better. And when I say this, I mean every sentence, every word,
Sure.
there's no stopping.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you touched on it a little bit with your kind of research trip, but in general, whether it be journalism to novelist, going from writing a book to promoting a book, or maybe even not creatively based, do you feel imposter syndrome in your life? And where is it most prevalent if you do?
I think the most difficult part of this was this interim between sending the book off for potential selection and it being selected. So in December of 2021, Penguin Random House opened a 10-day submission for unagented writers, and which I was at the time. I was querying agents actively, but they had never done it before. It was just a very brief window, and I had everything ready. I had my sample pages, query pitch, synopsis, the whole deal. So I sent it off and just put my head down and kept working, because I thought, okay, I'm going to give it my best shot with this book. This feels like a book that I really put my heart into, and I'll write another one, and I'll write another one after that and another one, and surely something someday will stick. But really for me, it's the writing. I really want to do this forever. But when you're waiting to be published, for me, there was such an up and down roller coaster of emotions that I was a little unaccustomed to. I think that was really what surprised me the most about it. And the whole time that I was like, what if it doesn't matter in the end? They were already looking at this manuscript or at these sample pages I'd sent in. and eventually would request the full, and then we'd, I'd have an agent, we'd have a deal. And but so to me, I like to talk about that stretch of 18 months because it's faith. Whatever faith means to you, it's a faithful process where you are faithful to your dream, to yourself, to how you envision your art going into the world. And it is so full of ups and downs. I think it was for me.
Yeah.
That I think it's helpful to hear from writers who have been there talk about that experience. And that's what I did for a lot of those days when I wondered what's going to come of this. I listened to podcasts like yours. I read accounts of other authors in those moments before those publishing events happened to them. So that's where I really drew a lot of comfort.
Yeah. Once again, I think going back to that idea of community, right, and how we can all kind of really be immersed in that community as a support system. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder, just to continue with the sort of imposter theme a little bit. Another thing that fascinated me about Mask of the Deer Woman is there are the title refers to a literal mask that's on the wall of one of the characters in the book. But what you also do throughout the book is you sort of subtly thread in this idea of mask as metaphor with a few different characters. You refer to their masks, their sort of public-facing masks slipping. What was it that compelled that to become this kind of through-line theme for the book?
On a technical note, it was really important to me to layer throughout the book all of these different aspects that, when you peeled them away, still reinforced each other.
Mhm.
And so I really enjoyed doing that from a technical aspect. But the truth is, I'm just fascinated by the unknowable person. Even someone, I've been married for 30 years. And even now, I think, do we really know each other as well as we could? And the answer is no, because you can't. It's not possible to truly know someone, every single thing about them. And so if that's true for a 30-year marriage, think how true that is for, you know, people that aren't that involved in your life. You're not that involved in theirs. And so I love this difference that we can really only exploit in literature, where we have what people are presenting to the world, and then we're able to see these thoughts and feelings and all of these things that are behind that mask. And I think that is absolutely fascinating.
Mm. One of the things that I thought was really beautifully done, and something I really related to with Greg in my first book, The Woman Inside, was the use of the main character self-medicating to cope and cope with grief, and that being also a device to kind of cause a segue to a supernatural element, or, are they really seeing this? Is this really happening? And I think a lot of thrillers and mysteries use this device to varying degrees of effectiveness, but I think you really nailed it. And, I'm wondering, was that a conscious decision that you were going to have Carrie Starr be heavily medicating and self-medicating in the way that she was with substances? And were there moments where you were kind of like, how do I do this so that she can still function in this, scene? Were you factoring kind of the math of the self-medication?
Yes. I like this idea of her self-medicating because she is in so much pain. It's so tremendous that there's really no way to survive it unless she tamps some of that down. And that's what she's doing with these substances. And yet, there's such a resilience there, even though she doesn't feel it. Because, like a lot of people who go through terrible things, she gets up every day and does it anyway. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about her character as we see her in this book. This still moving forward. It isn't very healthy. It doesn't always look great, and it's not always effective. but she's still putting one foot in front of the other. And I think that's a really important representation
Mhm.
to put out in the world.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I like about her that sometimes she feels like she can function anyway, and sometimes she feels like she can function anyway and can't. And so there's that misjudgment about her own self that she has. And you're right, that really does allow us that ambiguity as we move into a supernatural force, that what's real, because of course we have deer, but also we have Dear Woman.
Mhm.
And in the end, I think we're still kind of wondering what's real here. And I like that ambiguity because that reflects life. We don't always have answers for everything that we see or experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Right.
that speaks to something else. Within the text of the book, Star's character is described as looking for the right and wrong, the black and white of it all.
Mhm.
And this, she is, of course, and it reads as if, part of this is to kind of make sense of the world, and then also now to kind of process her grief in some sort of form. But of course, she's living in not only a world, but in a particular situation in the book that's very nuanced and uncertain. So I have to imagine from a creative perspective that provided a really useful tension for you to kind of write that character.
I felt like it did. I don't know that that was super intentional on my part at first, but as I went back through it, I thought, oh, this is really working well. And I do like to really play those tensions off of each other. You know, she's coming from Chicago. She's kind of a hard boiled detective, right? And, she's coming here where she cannot get a straight answer about anything. Nothing is as it seems. She doesn't understand half of what's, occurring. So I really liked being able to kind of, make her step back a little bit as she's entering into a situation that she thought would be, kind of a walk in the park, just somewhere she could land for a while to figure out what to do next. But where she ends up is really in the midst of this vibrant, living community that is facing its own crisis.
Mhm. Mm. Well, one of the topics, one of the major plot points, and I realize we haven't really had you set up the book. So maybe if you don't mind, actually, can you talk about what the book is about? I know halfway through, but that will kind of make more sense with my question.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to. So, the premise is really that to find herself, a tribal marshal must find a missing girl. And that happens after Carrie Starr leaves her job in Chicago after an shooting that took place that was a little questionable, probably more than a little, but she had such a great reputation there and such a history of work and friends that she kind of got cleared of that. But it was really conditional. Okay, we cleared you, get out. And so she is, throwing a wide net for a job. And she finds a Bureau of Indian Affairs tribal marshal position on a what is in the book a fictional reservation, the Salaqua Nation in Oklahoma, just over the Kansas Oklahoma line. And it is where her father had grown up. Now, she, to her memory, had never been there. Her father didn't talk about the place or his culture or even his family after he left the reserve. And so she's really stepping into it as an outsider. And once she's there, she's almost immediately embroiled in this search for a missing college student who is doing a research project that could really change the future of the reservation. And then you tack on all of that with magical realism. There's a deer woman that's both a protector and an avenger.
Mm.
There is an endangered species, and there's also the threat of an oil company coming in. So there are a lot of moving parts that are happening in the story, and I quite like it that way.
Yeah. There's so much, and you stitch it together so tightly, and your description is beautiful. You did much better than I ever could. So, what I wanted to talk about a little bit with this idea of missing Indigenous women and the kind of epidemic of it, and I wanted to read two beautiful pieces. One was that she knew the BIA didn't have a comprehensive national database to track missing Indigenous women, even though Indigenous women were 7 times more likely to be murdered than white women. The ratio of Indigenous women who are missing was even higher. And then a little bit later, when Indigenous women disappeared, they disappeared twice, once in life and once in the news. So, the first piece just being staggering and shocking because I understand it's based in reality. We talked a little bit with Vanessa Lilly when she was on to talk about Blood Sisters. And then this kind of second piece about Indigenous women, they're disappearing twice, is so powerful. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what it was like to unpack the reality of this. And was that part of when you went into writing the book? Was that a major kind of tenet that you wanted to talk about?
So as I write, I research as things come up in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And when I discovered these really shocking, true statistics, it almost immediately turned into um, an awareness campaign, right? And I talk about it with everyone now because I can't believe we're not all discussing this. And the terrible truth is that these staggering numbers of missing Indigenous women are actually unknown. Like it's like you just read, the number is actually much higher because there are so many gaps in jurisdictional issues, in reporting, in the way that information is tracked. And every sovereign nation is its own entity. And it is so, sometimes that feels so complicated, but the truth is, it really shouldn't be, because we have missing women at the center of it, and that should be an issue that we can all concentrate on, whatever those variables are that bring that to bear, and do something about. And so it was really important to me to make sure that I got that part of it right. We worked extensively with an authenticity reader. I've reached out now to several national and local missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit organizations to see, how I might be able to volunteer or help share information. So I think it's something we should all be concerned about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's occurring to me as we're talking about it, what we're talking about, what you're talking about with these staggering numbers and underreportage. There's so much in terms of misogyny, gender specific violence, patriarchal attitudes and behaviors and things like that. And the dear woman, in the title, as you yourself mentioned a few moments ago, depending on the scenario, can either be protector or sort of instrument of vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of the perfect, if you look at it almost as like a morality tale or a fable in a way, it almost has that perfect sort of framework for like the idea of justice around this great injustice. Was that something that you went into with that specific idea, or did you kind of discover that as you went?
I think that just came up naturally because I feel like that's often what women are, and not just myself, but a lot of the women I know are both, so caring and loving and nurturing, but fierce and protective, and will do what it takes to, take care of their own. So I think all of those things really lent themselves already to this Dear Woman myth and into the story itself. And
Yeah.
Dear Woman has been around forever and existed in many nations. And so, even close to home, she's said to roam a cemetery near here sometimes. And someone I know says they've seen her. So it's interesting to see how pervasive that these myth stories are.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, for instance, I was thinking about it as I was reading it. I don't know if you watched Reservation Dogs when that was on.
Yes,
Series.
yes.
And that, and this also goes to your point of, a few minutes ago when you were talking about, how these stories are not necessarily, people aren't covering these stories because I think that,
Mhm.
for obvious reasons, right? Certain, voices have not necessarily had the kind of opportunity to be heard over a long time. That's in news, that's in publishing, that's in entertainment. But it's interesting to now you're starting maybe to get like more indigenous creators who have a little bit more autonomy and are able to put those stories out. So it's interesting for me, like not having heard of the Deer Woman myth until recently. Now it's been in two kind of cultural pieces of art that I really enjoyed just within these last few years as well.
Yes, there's so much out there to discover about
Yeah,
people and cultures, and I think that is endlessly fascinating. I'll probably always explore that.
yeah.
Mm. Do you feel like with your next project, which I want to hear as much as you're willing to talk about, is there any kind of pressure, or has the bar been raised both because this book has been so well received? Does that increase the kind of pressure you put on yourself creatively? And then also, is there a kind of internal pressure to have the next book kind of be about the awareness of another cause that's maybe underrepresented or undercovered?
That is a great question. So, hi, I'm the problem. It's me. I'm the one putting pressure on myself, and I don't think that'll ever stop. That's so ingrained in what I'm like. I was as a journalist, I freelanced for many years, and I would always tell myself, this is kind of my motivation. I would say, you're only as good as your last story. Like really hit it out of the park this time. And that's how I feel about these books. I want to continue to learn and improve, and at the same time tell these really compelling stories with some truth at the center that might change the way we see the world a little bit. And so the pressure is all me. And I'm also happy to say that Mask of the Deer Woman star Carrie Starr is now a series, so there will be more books. So I'm currently editing the second one right now, and I'm really excited to share with people where she's at in this book.
And that's a Wrath of the Water Tiger. Is that correct?
It was. Yes, we're
Oh,
going to, yes, it's being retitled right now.
okay.
But yes, so it will still have this strong mythological element to it that I find really fascinating, and some other things like that too.
How has it been the experience of going from, writing like journalistic style pieces to now writing fiction with the sequel? How is it how have you found the experience of still being able to kind of be in that world and kind of dig deeper into character stuff and just sort of expand this beautiful world you've built out?
Well, it felt like a homecoming to return to it. I've spent so much time here in my head that working on the second one, I was like, oh, I'm back. Hi, everybody. It just feels really good to be here. And let's see what's going on. And so I'm excited for us to get to know some characters better and to meet some new characters. And then really to explore some issues that I think are really interesting, that are both on whole different ends of the spectrum, some environmental issues, but then also some, human safety issues and things like that. So I think there's just a lot that I wanted to bring together in this second one too.
I'm so glad to hear because I needed to know what's going on with Carrie. I worry about her. So thank
I
you.
know. It's so I that has been the best thing, because she doesn't just exist in my head anymore. And my father-in-law stopped by the other day, and he sat down. It was like an intervention. He was like, look, she can't keep doing this if she's going to be effective at her job.
Yes.
And I was like, I know, so we had this whole talk and then I just had to laugh. I'm like, oh, right. She's not, I mean, she's
She's
real
not
to me, but
real, but she is.
yeah, she's not real.
One of the things that I love too, there's sort of a point counterpoint thing that you lay in very, very subtly in the book, but you have Carrie with her issues, and then you have Junior, who's another wonderful character. Like I love Junior. He's another one that I think about after I finish the book. I'm like, oh, Junior's going to get there. I hope he's going to, But Junior has, you find out sort of as the story has worn on a bit that Junior has this really beautiful creative outlet that is sort of discovered, and there's such and it actually brings Star such kind of like joy to see that he has this aspect of wonderment that he's able to kind of have this outlet and do that. And I just thought I'm realizing it's not really a question I'm asking, it's more just an observation of like, it's such a great thing of Star just really like white knuckling the whole thing and really getting by, and Junior having very similar kind of substance issues and things like that. But just to then have him have this pure artistic creative outlet is so, like, for the reader as well, was so almost like a relief. There's like joy in that.
Yes. And that was important to me to have some lighter moments in the book, to have some moments of joy like that, because it reflects life,
Yeah.
but also it I needed a little relief in the story myself.
Mhm.
And as I was writing it, because it does talk about some really difficult things. And so to have those moments of beauty, I think is really illustrative of what people are really like, that we may not know about them, but we could if we get to know them.
Laurie, with our last couple of minutes, because you mentioned earlier being fascinated by other writers' kind of practices, you talked a little bit about internally processing and then writing the middle part of this book in, a few days, which is amazing. In general, what does your process look like?
Oh, it changes all the time because I'm always writing experimentally. But right now, I start my day with some kind of craft book, because that's the other thing. I'm a real writing nerd, and so I read craft books all the time. And so I'll start my day with that. If I just find it inspiring and it gives me things to try, or Uh, try on for size. And then I write 3 or 4 hours a day, and then I try to read for about an equal amount of time every day. And I have dogs, so sometimes that doesn't go
Mhm.
as planned,
Right.
but I love audiobooks and that helps. But that's my routine right now. And I try to do the real generative writing first thing, and then as the day goes on, come back and edit other portions.
Hmm. Do you
And
have a
when you're
favorite craft book that you recommend?
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Right, right now, I'm getting ready to read. I've been reading Robert Olin Butler, and I'm getting ready to read Wired for Story, and thinking through writing. So
Oh,
we'll
that's
see.
great.
Nice. When you were mentioning that you spend an equal part of your day reading as well, is it a scenario where, depending on where you are in the book or like what you think you need to work on in terms of character or plot or whatever, are you trying to specifically read to readers who do that well, or are you just kind of reading, as you like, reading to taste, or however?
Oh, that's a great question. I really steer clear of anything that's close to my book while I'm writing it. But what I do find is this really lovely thing that occurs, because I read everything, and fiction, nonfiction, literary fiction, the whole gamut. And I will be reading something completely unrelated, and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, that's it. And
Mm.
it will prompt some idea. I'll untangle some knot that was in my head. So it's absolutely an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then also when you are you mentioned that you're still sort of trying different things out and your process switches up. Are there any things that you've come across that have become more habitual, or things that you do come back to? Anything that's like stuck thus far?
Mm. Well, I'm lucky that as a journalist, I learned to write everywhere in any kind of conditions,
Mm.
and that has really served me well. And while that's still true, I do have a writing chair, and it has room for one of my dogs to
Mm.
lay beside me. And so I know when I sit in that chair, now I'm so habituated that when I sit in that chair, I'm like, oh, must write. So it really does work if you kind of instill that in yourself.
Yeah.
I love that. Everyone needs a writing chair.
Yes.
Well, Laurie, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. This has been such a pleasure. Everyone should read Mask of the Deer Woman. And where can listeners find you out in the world so they can keep up on what you have coming next and wherever you're appearing, etc.?
Well, thank you for having me. This has been so fun to visit with you about books. It is my favorite thing to do, and it's been such a great conversation.
Yeah.
If you want to keep up with me, it's my website, which is my name, lauriedove.com. And there's a newsletter sign up, there's a list of events that are coming up, and a way to get in touch with me. So I would love to hear from you. I love to talk to readers and writers and build this community that we're all in.
All right. I love that. Could not have said it better. Thank you for sharing your time with us, Laurie. It's been wonderful to learn from you, discuss, and yeah, we cannot wait for not Wrath of the Water Tiger, but we cannot wait for the sequel,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
will anxiously await the new title. But yeah, thank you for spending your time with us.
It's been wonderful.
All right. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
And you can find us on Instagram at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com. Thanks for listening.